English translation, 876th contact. Thursday, 25th January 2024, 8.16 HRs.
There you are again, my friend. Greetings and welcome, Ta. I am very glad you are back. Quetzal was here last night and told me you were coming today. He found a new way to get into my office, because I was occupied and we did not hear a knock on the door. We were in the office talking animatedly, so we did not hear anyone knocking on the door of Eva's office. I only realized that someone wanted to come in when the red light on the phone flashed and Michael's phone number was displayed on the machine, but he was in my office. So the case was clear for us, so we ended our conversation immediately and Michael left. Quetzal also came by then.
Greetings, my friend, and I am also happy to be back. Yes, Quetzal, he is inventive and never at a loss when it comes to making himself noticed. He knows his way around the center and also knows how to use the speaking apparatus.
We have noticed that. By the way, we call the intercom a telephone, but you know that.
Of course, it is the might of habit, as you sometimes say.
Exactly. I also feel the same way, because you just get used to something and then you use it completely automatically.
That is so.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it is not always good because the might of habit often brings trouble, or just something that should not be.
I guess that is correct, but it is hard to control the habitual.
That is true, but you should not get angry about it like some people are.
That is wrong. But this here, I read some things quickly and I see that Akim's name is written at the bottom here. I am interested. May I read the whole thing?
Of course, there is nothing to stop you. Just read it.
Thank you.
The treasure of the creation energy teaching and the true wisdom.
On the 24th of January 2024, UNESCO celebrated World Education Day. On this day, the Cultural and Educational Organization of the United Nations reminded us of the common educational goal of the global community. By 2030, all human beings should have the opportunity for lifelong learning and an inclusive, equitable, and high-quality education. All UN member states have agreed on this in the Global Education Agenda 2030. All good and well, you might say. These are valuable goals, but they only take into account one side of education, namely the purely material school and book knowledge that teaches all things of the gross material, physics, chemistry, mathematics, and all other sciences separately and incoherently, and without the crucial basic knowledge of the creation energy teaching, that is to say, teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life. Without this profound knowledge and the relative wisdom of the human being resulting from the study and implementation in daily life, the life of the human species on the blue planet Earth is not only largely devoid of content, alienated from meaning and aimless for each individual human being, but its continued existence is highly endangered. The current world situation and the now very precarious and life-threatening state of nature on our home planet are in acute danger of a collapse of all vital systems of planetary nature and the entire environment. Every awake human being who looks at the given reality with an open and neutral mind must be aware of this. The human beings of Earth must urgently and immediately turn to the creational natural truth and reality and recognize that they can only lead a good, healthy, fulfilled life worth living if they take responsibility for themselves and the creation around them and create the foundations for a truly humane life within themselves. Anyone who is in search of the deep meaning of life, who longs for answers to questions about the inner and innermost nature of human beings, and simply wants to improve the way they deal with themselves and their fellow human beings in their everyday lives, and to improve in understanding, friendship, love, harmony, and connectedness, will find a real treasure trove of knowledge and wisdom at Figua, which is now offered worldwide in the various online shops of the Figu groups. A small insight into the literature offered by Figu based on an excerpt from the book Insights on the Path to Effective Humanity.
Creation energy teaching, that is to say spiritual teaching.
The creation energy teaching, that is to say teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, does not represent an esoteric, religious, sectarian, religious, or other cultic or political direction. It also does not contain a spiritual panacea, or could enable anyone to perform miracles. Contrary to the latter, this teaching explains that no masters fall from the sky, and no human beings roast pigeons fly into their mouths, but that all results must be worked for purposefully and thoroughly if they are to be successful in the long term. It also makes it clear that a rapture, divinity, or other types of elevation of one human being above another can never be truthfully justified, because all human beings are of the same nature and therefore of the same value in their capacity as human beings. Creation energy teaching aims to promote the evolution of the entire human consciousness with its mental factors by referring to all the facts of human existence, and then declaring this to be evolutionarily fulfilling and therefore correct if it is orientated towards a creational natural way of life. Such a way of life takes into account all creational natural laws in every respect, from which the creational recommendations formulated in the teaching are derived, and which represent, naturally, effective counseling for an evolutionarily successful use of the laws of creation by human beings. Based on this, the teaching deals with human virtues, the development of personality and character, interpersonal relationships, including partnerships, etc., and so on. In this way, it provides human beings with a practical reference to their thoughts, feelings, and emotions, as well as to their behavior and actions in daily life. Interested human beings may wish to consult the following websites where Figu literature can be ordered in various languages.
Image, Figu, Shop, the online shop of Wasser Manzeit Verlag. Category, Books, Spiritual Science. Achim Wolf, Germany.
And what do you say to that?
I think Achim's words are good, and you should also reflect them in our conversation report.
I will. And to that end, I also think it would be good if the whole thing was also put up in the special time sign, as well as some of the things I have written that you might want to read.
What is it all about?
This here in the computer regarding overpopulation. Wait a minute. Yeah, here. Then there is the, yes, here, this one regarding sociopathy. If you want to read them. They are a bit long, though.
There is no question about it, my friend, because I am always very interested in what lines of thought you indulge in. The essays and articles that you have written, and that Sfath, my father has added to his annals are very remarkable, and are actually works that should not have been written by a boy, but by a grown man with a lot of life experience.
Ta, please. You are putting me on the spot, and I do not want to mention that when recalling the conversation, which is why I will replace it with dots.
No, that would not be correct, which is why you should not do that, because it is the truth and you should never hide it. But good. This is what I want to read because this is an important topic that cannot be addressed enough. So let me read.
Overpopulation.
The human being lives in the excess of his overpopulation as if he owned the earth, but he is only an iota of the great whole and a guest and is, if it is taken exactly, absolutely dispensable for the planet and its nature and all its ecosystems, because these get along absolutely without the earth's humanity, whereas the human being cannot live without the whole of nature, which he and all its ecosystems and even the planet itself can destroy with all its evil machinations and means. And even the planet itself with all evil machinations and means. There is truly no other living being on Earth that does this irrevocably and sustainably, only the human being alone, who destroys not only his own habitat, but also the habitat of all living beings. And so it happens for all habitats, namely for human beings themselves, for all animals, creatures, and all self-propelled life forms, as well as for all the largest and smallest plants worldwide on Earth, in its fields, floodplains, meadows, and forests, in caves and other cavities in the Earth's interior, in the mountains, seas, lakes, rivers, streams, puddles, and rivulets, and also in the moors, swamps, and marshes. And every day, around 160 life forms of all genera and species are wiped out through the fault of human beings, as a result of their destruction and devastation of all these important ecological areas, and in some cases also through their direct actions in the form of shooting, poisoning, or other forms of killing. However, despite all this monstrosity, it does not occur to the Earthling to drastically reduce its overpopulation in the completely normal way of a controlled birth stop, and necessarily over a period of years in order to bring Earth's humanity to a normal population level, which is to be calculated at around 500 million human beings for the entire Earth planet. This measure, however, is exceeded 18-fold in 2024 with 9.44 billion, whereby this overpopulation was created in only 300 years, namely from the year 1701, when 536,718,004 human beings still populated the Earth. Since ancient times, when Earthlings were not so old in years of life, they have become more capable of increasing their age through all kinds of life-prolonging drugs and food supplements, etc. The Earthling's life expectancy has been increased. The human being's life expectancy, at least in rich industrialized countries, has risen to around 75 years. In Japan, over 80 years, while in southern and underdeveloped countries life expectancy is 50 to 60 years. Population growth in industrialized countries is currently not as serious as in countries where there is little or no industry, from where countless economic refugees are also seeking their way to industrialized European countries or to America and Canada, with many falling victim to death on the journey. However, this should not obscure the fact that more and more descendants are also increasing the population in the rich industrialized countries, which means that countless new residential buildings, silos, factories, roads, airport expansions, sports fields and paths, etc. have to be built. This destroys the fertile land, requires more food, medicines, consumer goods, luxury items, means of transport, etc., etc., and also increasingly pollutes the entire environment, destroying all nature and every habitat for wildlife and plant life. The increase in populations on Earth is mainly and primarily taking place in the countries of India, which is expected to overtake the most populous country on Earth to date, China, in a few years, Egypt, Indonesia, Tanzania, Nigeria, Pakistan, the USA, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and also Ethiopia, and so on. If the rampant overpopulation growth is not finally counteracted with a very strictly controlled, multi-year, global birth rate freeze, the entire world population will become so exuberant that it may rise to over 14 billion, and everything will degenerate into a very nasty catastrophe. Environmental protection is already a farce. A lot of money is being spent on nonsensical and ineffective things because they will be outdated and worthless in a short space of time, because overpopulation has once again outstripped and cancelled everything out. If everything is not changed for the better very quickly, and the already long-lived affluent human society is drastically reduced through a global and controlled birth stop, then nature will be further plundered and poisoned. Contaminated and effectively eaten dry, the planet will be robbed of its remaining resources, and then for the Earthlings its continued existence is indeed Matthew at the last. Everything will then be completely destroyed, irrevocably and much faster than human beings can imagine. But until it really gets to that point, it will become increasingly uncomfortable on the planet, because CO2 emissions are getting worse and worse and are poisoning the atmosphere, along with other toxins, more and more, making it increasingly difficult and precarious and deadly for human beings, and all living things in general, to breathe. Many people are already dying of respiratory distress because breath-hardening toxins are being inhaled instead of pure oxygen, with the toxic gas CO2 in particular making up the largest proportion that hinders breathing. The production of food and drink, for human beings alone, currently generates 1/3 of total CO2 emissions, and this amount will increase in relation to the further growth of humanity. As mentioned above, this figure may reach 14 billion 14,000,000 if it is not finally recognized and understood that only a worldwide and officially controlled stop to the birth rate can save us from extinction. All the nonsense that is being fabricated elsewhere, such as the attempt at failing and completely pointless as well as crazy, misguided environmental protection measures that cost millions and millions of dollars, will achieve nothing at all. This is because the only solution to saving planet Earth, all ecosystems, nature, its fauna and flora and human beings, is to drastically and rapidly reduce overpopulation by stopping the birth rate worldwide and in a controlled manner. There is no other solution. So all other and completely thoughtless efforts and attempts, etc., are completely pointless. But this does not occur to the environmental demonstrators, the experts and loudmouths of environmental protection, and the other greats of those specialists who know everything better and are not even capable of calculating and imagining what the future holds. They are also just as blind-sighted and mendacious as the parts of governments that lie to the people and conceal the real truth from them, thereby making money for their own pockets, as they have done and are still doing. For example, with the corona pandemic, that is to say, with the ineffective V.remove against the corona rampantly spreading disease, which according to earthly experts has cost over 17 million human lives, but to which the Plejaren declare that it was over 22 million. What the Earthlings are now spreading again, mainly a well-known Swiss daily newspaper, which also corresponds to a lie, is that over 1.4 million human beings have been saved. Healed and saved from death with the completely worthless CoronaWac.remove, which probably only corresponds to a hoax to mislead, lie and deceive the people. The truth is that the CoronaWac.remove were initially carried out for months using only distilled water, which of course not only deceived the corona victims, who usually died, but was also absolutely criminal and only designed to make money, all of which filled the coffers of the pharmaceutical companies. Later, mixtures were produced that were no more effective than the distilled water, but had the opposite effect, which was even more unpleasant. And when you consider that no Wac.remove was available when the coronavirus pandemic broke out, which was artificially created in China at the request of a citizen of the USA as an act of revenge, then any human being with even half a brain can imagine the lies and deceit behind the completely useless coronavirus Wac.remove. These were advocated and even partly ordered by completely irresponsible politicians. But now, other politicians are coming along and insulting those who are now revealing the truth that they themselves have witnessed. Some of the politicians who deny the truth, as well as persons who also take themselves seriously, who are actually rivets and only think like fools, either belong to the faith or are even more stupid than lowly intelligent. In their low intelligence, they even believe that certain fraudulent experts are the ultimate in knowledge, which is why they are now attacking the bearers of truth in a lowly, intelligent and simple-minded manner and insinuating that they are lying, and also claiming that they are humiliating the country's most successful and important industry, by which they mean the fraudulently enriching pharmaceutical industry, and only the one that has supplied distilled water and hot air and untested whack ... remove. According to Play-Aron's investigations, whack ... remove against the corona rampantly spreading disease were put into circulation and used as a whack ... remove, which, just a few months after whack ... remove, not only caused vaginal bleeding in women who were on the way to ending their menopause or menstrual cycle, or had left it behind and thus ended it. Whether they are still used today is to be clarified, but also caused health problems. According to Play-Aron's investigations and information, these whack ... remove particularly attacked the uterus, which could be affected by cancer as a result. Those who attack those who spread the truth and accuse them of lies and insinuations, etc., those who accuse the truth spreaders of lies and insinuations, etc., and think that the fraudulent experts are smarter should take a good look at themselves, whose names should not be mentioned for the time being, but which may still be necessary, who knows. They think and feel great and powerful and are obviously windy sneaks, who themselves know that the propagated and applied whack ... remove were and still are just hot air. But by attacking the truth-tellers, they are only doing this to make good weather in order to keep their government positions. Their nasty behavior of the nasty insulters and their lack of conscience, whereby they make a mess of the righteous who try to bring the truth to light and openly say what kind of dirty work is being done in governments, can unfortunately also be found in Switzerland, because former rulers who have witnessed everything are talking straight about what is really true and corresponds to the truth. And it has to be said that if such human beings fully stand up for the truth and say what the real truth is, then they are made a pig of and, if possible, publicly dragged through the mud by the media, which are no better than that fallible and ineffectual part of those in power, the authorities and politicians who act perfidiously and disgustingly, and lie to, deceive and bully the population, but are still highly remunerated by their tax money. Now, if possible, those who spill the beans and tell the truth, spread the truth and reveal the nasty and rotten machinations, which are effectively and really driven by the government or also by the authorities, are not only silenced by lies, deceit and harassment, but also made correctly dead and thus eliminated from the world. I can sing a 25-fold song of such attempts myself, although fortunately I was able to destroy the notes of this malicious and bad music and found it all just ridiculous. However, various witnesses who were directly present at such incidents and thus experienced everything were unable to do so. It should also be said that a whack ... remove against diseases or rampantly spreading diseases that is only partially effective or really fully effective is found in painstaking laboratory work, which is really only possible through years of work, so usually in 10 or 15 years, if not in a much longer time. This is the case, for example, with the nasty malaria, whose single-cell pathogen was originally transmitted somehow from chimpanzees to human beings in dark equatorial Africa, in 3 species, such as Malaria tropica, also called falciparum malaria, malaria quartana, which I myself am affected by, and which is actually the rarest. Then there is malaria tertiana. For malaria, the first result for a whack-remove was only achieved after around 100 years of research, namely the malaria whack-remove Mosquirix RTS S. Asto1. However, time will tell to what extent this whack-remove, developed by the British pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline in 2019, is clean and also effective. As this whack-remove is the first ever to be developed worldwide that is supposed to be effective against parasitic diseases. This is despite the fact that the first malaria vaccination trials were carried out as early as 1948, but were fundamentally useless and unsuccessful. There are records that as early as 1796, a scientist is said to have made an attempt to cure malaria by curing an 8-year-old boy with the secretion from pustules or cavities on the surface of the skin of a woman suffering from cowpox or infected by cowpox virus. However, to what extent this corresponds to the truth or not, if the old saying may be used, the gods know, as they say, because today this can no longer be verified, and there is not even any information about where this is supposed to have been. Now, with regard to the corona whack-remove, namely that many human beings died after whack-remove, it should be clear to any human being still capable of understanding and reason that the pharmaceutical companies were clearly acting criminally and even criminally for the sake of profit. This was particularly the case when, barely after the emergence of the corona rampantly spreading disease, they threw hot air onto the market as useless whack-remove, costing the lives of over 22 million human beings. But idiots who do not understand this, even if they are in governments, politicians, Ämtliniders, otherwise right-wingers or sympathizers of such crooked elements and possibly spying on getting to the helm of government themselves, do not want to admit it. Now, just how deceitfully, meanly, irresponsibly and idiotically lowly intelligent, the citizens of all countries are treated worldwide in the aforementioned wise, and how they are deceived, lied to and cheated by the unrighteous part of the authorities, is also the case with regard to the increasingly frequent appearance of UFOs worldwide. Not only certain parts of government, but also the military and secret services are leading the people by the nose, also in Switzerland, and denying the existence of UFOs, although clear, tangible evidence of their existence exists. However, those persons who can provide such evidence are either simply declared insane and mentally ill, labeled as cranks or fantasists, etc., have their memories erased, are given medication, persecuted, threatened, silenced, or simply radically eliminated from the world and thus murdered. This is done by simply claiming and lying that the people concerned had a fatal accident, that they were seriously ill or had suffered a heart attack, etc. But threats and such persecutions or deaths are never investigated and cleared up, because this is prevented by lies and deceit from parts of the government and the military, to which the authorities also play along in some places. In the least serious cases, the persons are branded and labeled as fantasists, brain patients, illusionists, madmen and cranks, or they are interned in spinning windmills and even in asylums to keep them away from the public, to whom they could tell their observations or experiences. On the one hand, this is the image of the truth, while on the other hand, the true interests of those who are keen to get hold of UFOs and their futuristic technology in order to abuse them for their own purposes, and their lust for power and hegemony are concealed and not publicized. In this regard, the USA in particular should be mentioned, as well as Russia and China, but also smaller states. Certain elements in Switzerland are also endeavoring to deny and ridicule certain things when it comes to UFOs, but are obviously and undoubtedly so lowly intelligent with regard to surveillance, etc., that it is hilariously stupid and so conspicuous that even the blind, deaf and insane, can perceive and understand what is actually being played out. Well, it is probably not greed for power that is the driving force, but fear and uncertainty as to what is really going on, as well as influences from abroad, which I think is better to keep quiet about. The fact is, however, that it is mainly states like the USA, Russia and China, but above all the USA, that are keen on the futuristic technology of UFOs, and America's hegemonistic behavior, which cannot be denied, does not even stop there, because the cowardly fear of those responsible leads them to shoot at the UFOs themselves, whose technology they want to use for their hegemonic behavior, but are always unable to understand. But I think I have said enough on this subject, so I would like to return to what I started with, namely, overpopulation. Unfortunately, people also lie and cheat about overpopulation and claim that it is much lower than it really is. The world population count clock supplies earthly humanity with false figures and deceives them, because at present it counts a world population of just 8 billion and around 155 million human beings, whereas in reality, according to Playaran counts and data, 9 billion and 440 million human beings populate planet Earth, which corresponds to around 1 billion and 300 million more. And these figures are accurate and prove the world population clock to be a lie and a fraud. But this is not recognized by the clever and loud-mouthed know-it-alls of the Earthlings, who supposedly deal accurately with overpopulation and its horrendous mass and growth. For the future, these experts claim that only in the year 2100 will there be between 9.4 and 12 billion human beings on Earth, whereby there is no mention of overpopulation at all. The following is all that is written.
Quote,
However, this estimate is subject to uncertainty. Global migration is rapidly changing the populations of individual countries, as both birth rates and mortality rates may also change unexpectedly over the next 80 years. And that could lead to problems. Over the millennia, more than 198 billion human beings have been born on Earth. By mid-2019, the current world population had risen to 7.7 billion human beings, according to Playaran data. However, it was around 9.100 billion. This means that we, who are currently alive, make up about 7% wrong earthly figures of all human beings who have ever lived on Earth. And there will be more. Even more. The world's population is growing rapidly. It has been growing by around 80 million per year for 4 decades wrong. According to Playaran's exact count, it averages 105 million per year, says Dr. Rainer Klingholz, director of the Berlin Institute for Population and Development. End of quote. The exponential world population will probably come to an end at some point, because the destructive damage caused by overpopulation to the planet, to all ecosystems, and thus to all nature and its fauna and flora, as well as the destruction and extinction, will take its revenge. On the one hand, the growth of overpopulation will continue to collapse because poverty and diseases and rampantly spreading diseases will become more and more rampant as evil epidemics and pandemics. Just as wars will also cause a reduction in humanity worldwide. Climate change and the resulting catastrophes and the poisoning of the atmosphere will also take so many lives that the world's population will decline, But this will not be enough to reduce overpopulation to such an extent that everyone can live a reasonably good and healthy life again, and all existence on Earth can recover, normalize and function properly and correctly. The very fact that human beings are getting older and older, and therefore living much longer, as well as the poisoning of the atmosphere, drug addiction and rising crime, and crimes relating to human trafficking, murder and manslaughter will become more and more widespread in the future. Just as overpopulation, contrary to false and mendacious claims and clarifications to the contrary, is being irresponsibly and senselessly driven up, will cause more and more very unpleasant and evil things in the future, also with regard to the health of human beings, whose immunity in this regard is suffering damage. That is what I have to say this time regarding overpopulation.
And
Profound and good, yes, and worth discussing.
that is good. That is enough. Here is the other article that Bernadette has already corrected for me, the one I wrote about sociopathy. I think something should also be said about this.
This is really a very important topic that you bring up, because as I have noticed time and time again, when closely observing and judging certain Earth's humanity, sociopathy is very much in evidence.
This is effectively so, especially with rulers, civil servants, security forces, and military personnel, as I have felt time and again during my life. But I have also had experiences of this with religionists, as well as with everyday personalities, which I also notice again and again with such people today.
I can confirm from my point of view that this is indeed the case, because through my observations and clarifications that I make in my observations and clarifications that I carry out here on Earth, I recognize that sociopathy is strongly pronounced in certain human beings. This especially in persons who hold leadership positions of some kind and therefore consider themselves to be extremely important and irreplaceable. But let me read your article now because I am interested in what you have written.
Sociopathy.
Yes, what is sociopathy? That is the question here, which can only be answered in such a way that it is nothing other than an abnormal, degenerate behavior of a human being incapable of any form of empathy and sense of guilt towards fellow human beings. Basically, a sociopathic person is someone who has an antisocial personality disorder and is unable or only able to, very limited extent, to empathize with the thoughts and feelings of another human being and to understand their creative energy processes, that is to say, their thoughts, feelings, emotions, and sensations. This indicates and testifies to an inability in this respect, as a result of which there is absolutely no willingness or ability to perceive, recognize, empathize with, and understand the personality traits of other human beings, which can simply be described as an inability to feel. Sociopathic people therefore completely lack the normal emotional empathy, social empathy and cognitive empathy, as a result of which they are unable to empathize with other human beings and even judge and treat them from above. And they do this in such a way that they, the sociopath, thereby create a sense of well-being for themselves and are indifferent and selfish towards their fellow human beings, while always putting their own well-being at the center. In addition, they talk often and a lot, immediately interfere in other people's conversations with lowly intelligent remarks, are unable to limit themselves to what is important when talking a lot, but chatter constantly and a lot of unnecessary things, thus prolonging their speeches so that, for example, something that could be said in less than a minute
or explained in 2 minutes takes 10 minutes or even longer. They also keep on talking and talking about the same thing that has been mentioned, even if everything that needs to be said has already been said and clarified. They just go on chatting endlessly and do not find an end and do not realize that everything that needs to be said has been said. But sociopaths do not realize this because they are so full of themselves, which they usually do not realize themselves, that they do not realize that they believe themselves to be much more important than all other human beings, whom they treat as if they were heir to them as a result of their arrogance. However, it is the case, and they do not think about this in any wise, that they could not live without this air, no matter how it is also seen. The way a sociopath should be confronted is to treat him absolutely and in every case, and without exception, as what he is one way or another, namely, a human being. But the way they are confronted is such that it must always be appropriate. Behavior towards a sociopath is simply appropriate, without any aggression, calmly, and at an appropriate distance, because human beings who are sociopaths react sensitively to being met aggressively or intrusively. Sociopaths have an antisocial personality and a corresponding demeanor and behavior, which is not exactly easy to encounter. For this reason, it is counseled to react calmly and behave calmly in a form of psychologically good behavior. It is always good and also correct to behave logically in an interaction, that is to say, in a reciprocal relationship with a sociopathic human being, for self-protection in such a way that, if necessary, a clear statement of one's own needs and ideas is made in a clear voice and manner of expression. The wording must be clear, factual, unambiguous, and also well-founded, but should never correspond to a justification, because such a justification is always wrong and absolutely reveals one's own inability, helplessness, and insecurity, and leads to the sociopathic human being gaining the upper hand. It is therefore important for every human being to be open, correct, and confident when dealing with a sociopath, and also to make their own legitimate might clear. However, it is important to always allow such human beings to save face, also when their behavior has been seen through. However, if this is disregarded, then this is evidence of their own sociopathic tendencies and usually also leads to aggression, hatred, and violence being triggered in the sociopath. A sociopathic human being is always and without exception more or less psychopathic to a certain extent, whereby it is always important for human beings afflicted with sociopathy to keep a low profile in this regard. It is therefore also better to ask the sociopath in one case or another before releasing any information yourself. This is true even if it is harmless things that are being discussed, because the sociopathic human being always wants to be right and more knowledgeable than the other person. However, if you have to deal with a sociopathic human being, or even have to live with one, it is important to always maintain a serious facial expression and to maintain eye contact throughout any conversation with them, as well as to also ensure a firm gait and an upright posture, as this not only shows confidence, but also steadfastness and strength. If earthly humanity is examined and analyzed very closely, it becomes clear that there are far more sociopaths running around in every society than is generally assumed. In particular, the rich, the educated, and scientists are widespread in every society, although this is also common in working class and teaching circles. According to Pliayaran's research, that is to say, SFAT's data, in the 1940s, around 1.6% of the world's 2.6 billion human beings were affected by this type of behavior. This is now the case in 2024, when 9.44 billion human beings populate the Earth, around 18 times more than the planet, all ecosystems, and therefore all of nature, with fauna and flora. The atmosphere and the climate could have coped with without suffering damage, but which was made impossible by the senselessness and irresponsible breeding of overpopulation, and the planet and all ecosystems were harassed and largely destroyed. Only the gods know this, who are just as fictitious and imaginary as the non-existent logic, the alleged intellect, and the unfortunately only fictitious reason of the earthling. The religious or secular delusion of faith, which is built solely on lies and deceit, and which the human beings of Earth are rapturously defending to the hilt in this greatest giant swindle ever constructed, will unfortunately keep the majority of Earth's humanity waiting a very long time for logic, understanding, and reason, and consequently true love, peace, and real freedom will have to wait many centuries and even longer. This is because the truth is frowned upon, and earthlings have been addicted to delusion since time immemorial through religious and secularly fabricated and false stories. Earth's humanity, the majority of earthlings who have fallen prey to delusional faith, want to be lied to and deceived because in their illusory thinking they are incapable of logic, understanding, and reason, but only believers who accept and defend as truth all lies and deceptions that have been thrown at them since ancient times. These believers, the majority of Earth's humanity, are nothing other than human beings who only practice a sham thinking based on didacticism, based on literalism in such a way that they simply believe what is written, such as in a book, in a brochure, on a flyer or poster, but also in a letter or in the form of a note, etc. These human beings are therefore literalists. These human beings are therefore literalists, that is to say, orthodidacts, who, as a result of a self-imposed compulsion, vehemently devour the written word, and imagine that only the written word is absolutely based on logic, understanding, and reason, and is therefore the effective truth. In addition to the orthodox, the word believers and factual believers should also be mentioned, whereby the word believers swear that everything they are told and told corresponds to the truth, without doubting it, if it is lies and deception, and without also giving a second thought to whether it is the truth, simply a fib, or a deliberate deception or lie. Every word is simply accepted and believed as the effective truth without thought, reflection, or scrutiny, regardless of whether it relates to religious or purely secular matters. Quite simply, every word is taken unchecked by faith as effective truth and passed on in this way as an unconscious lie, so that the next human being, who is also a believer in words, also unconsciously becomes a liar by faith and passes on what he has been told and heard, in the belief that it is based on truth, although on closer examination it becomes clear that every word is absolutely a lie. The factual believers should also be mentioned, which can be found, for example, especially among human beings who are interested in archaeology, history, or simply antiquity, etc. They unscrupulously create truths that they concoct from assumptions and conjectures, disseminate them as proven truths, written in books, or teach them at schools or seminars, and thus mislead those interested in these things. This, however, when taken seriously and judged correctly, is nothing other than lying and deception, namely, 1. Lying to and deceiving oneself with regard to one's own personality, and 2. Lying to and deceiving interested fellow human beings who believingly fall for lies and deceptions based only on assumptions and suppositions and believe them as the bare coin of truth, and we, without consciously wanting to do so, and therefore unconsciously, advocate them in a lying and deceptive manner. But an ancient proverb says, "The human being wants to be lied to and deceived, because the truth is too trivial for him." But let us get back to the actual topic and take a closer look at the average sociopath, who, it must be clearly explained, does not necessarily have to be a bad human being, and who can behave reasonably normally or quite harmoniously with individual or whole groups of other human beings. As a rule, he is often annoying and frequently indelicate, interfering in conversations in a nerve-wracking, ill-considered manner, and with lowly intelligent and even stupid objections and remarks. His lowly intelligent and impudent character disorder and bad behavior does not necessarily conceal a degenerate murderer, rapist, or thief. However, it is possible that in many cases it is a human being who also has mental disorders and is not aware of them in any wise. However, in this form, of which there are many different types, it means something worrying either way. As with every form of sociopathy, because there is inevitably always suppressed aggression lurking behind it, which can harbor a certain degree of danger under certain circumstances. However, this is fundamentally different in every sociopath with or without any psychopathic background. And so, everyone is controlled according to the nature of their character damage and thus their personality disorder. Something is always and in every case present also in a minimal wise, namely a certain dangerousness, which can be quite unpleasant for certain fellow human beings or the entire social environment. This is because the personally misguided behavior of a sociopath is unpredictable. This is because the sociopath's entire behavior is geared solely and without exception towards their own personal interests and their general well-being in any form, and they are completely indifferent to the well-being of others. Overall, for an effective sociopath, his fellow human beings are merely uneducated followers, while he considers himself to be infallible and perfect and believes that he alone is entitled to all rights to be treated well. They also believe that they are entitled to exercise such dominion over fellow human beings that they appear to be their personal slaves, regardless of whether they are their own partner or family members, any work colleagues, female or male colleagues or friendships and acquaintances, relatives, foreigners or superiors, etc. A sociopath, male or female, claims the right to systematically deceive fellow human beings, to betray and also deceive them, and even to take advantage of them in an evil way, to harm and exploit them in any wise. And they usually do this so deceitfully that those affected do not realize it at first. And if they do, they can hardly find a way to break away from the sociopath again, especially if a dependent love relationship or other bond has arisen from the relationship. It is not uncommon for such a relationship in such a partnership to become a life in hell for the disadvantaged party, which cannot be dissolved due to not daring out of fear, threats, physical violence, emotional abuse, sexual violence, dependency, or out of false love or shame. This can take many different forms, characterized by verbal violence of all kinds and shades, such as verbal abuse, mental cruelty, embarrassment, mockery, blackmail, constant control, jealousy, character assassination, ignorance and slander, shouting, humiliation, rejection, accusations of guilt, death threats, intimidation, manipulation, withdrawal of love, ignorance, insults, bullying, constant criticism, silence, belittling, that is to say, humiliation, arguments, terrorizing, neglect, disregard, scathing looks, insults and ridicule, etc. All of this leads to a loss of appetite or, conversely, to frustrated eating in those affected, usually women, but not infrequently, ultimately to suicide or even murder and manslaughter. It is only rarely the case that human beings intuitively recognize sociopaths, contrary to other claims by psychologist experts that there are more and more human beings who intuitively recognize sociopaths. However, this is not because people are developing more intuitive abilities, but because the ever-growing overpopulation means that more human beings are populating the world, which in turn means that more human beings with intuitive abilities are appearing on the scene. In other words, it is not more human beings who are developing intuitive abilities, but rather more of them are appearing as a result of the irrational and completely irresponsible growth of humanity. Basically, the human being of today and tomorrow is becoming more and more ignorant, uncreative and non-thinking, and therefore lowly intelligent, and is becoming more and more addicted to illusory thinking, as has been the case with religious belief since time immemorial, as a result of which the intuitive abilities of human beings are becoming more and more atrophied. As a result, the values of honor and dignity also atrophy and are replaced by indifference and even criminality and crime, as well as alcoholism, drug addiction, and fanaticism. This, as well as in the form of observing and admiring those human beings who still endeavor to produce some kind of achievement themselves, such as in sport, acting, etc., in respect of which the great and good are exalted and howled to the skies, while nothing is done and achieved themselves, but only others are exalted. Now, what needs to be explained further is this. Normally, intuitively inclined people, in relation to the overpopulation, are only few in number, and therefore an accumulation of them in one place only results because the overpopulation only makes more known, as do also many more sociopaths, because the more human beings inevitably make more appearances, but the ability of intuitiveness does not become more widespread, that is to say, resettles in human beings. The ability to grasp something intuitively is an ability of a minority of human beings who, as a result of the clarity of their very own conscious attitude to truth, perceive feelings and sensations that are not preceded by any conscious thoughts or illusory thoughts, but which enable judgments, certain knowledge and precise and clear conclusions about a fact, but which are by no means based on assumptions and opinions. Intuition is the ability of human beings to subconsciously and consciously perceive something in terms of feelings, sensations and emotions without any preceding concrete thoughts or also desires, etc. This is an ability of only a minority of human beings. However, this is only an ability of a minority of human beings who cultivate their intelligentum. So it is not possible for normal human beings because they only indulge in illusory thoughts and their intelligentum diminishes and even partially atrophies. Sociopaths of both sexes are being recognized less and less, which means that there are also more and more broken family relationships. Frequent changes of partnerships and friendships, etc., as well as lying, thievery, cheating, criminality, and crime, and thus murder and manslaughter, war and terror. It should also be noted elsewhere, which apparently goes unnoticed by the knowing loudmouth scientists in charge, that the ecological carrying capacity of the planet and the entire habitat of all living beings, human beings, creatures, all other living and self-moving life forms, as well as all the largest plants, such as the seagrass Posidonia australis and the giant trees Sequoiadendron giganteum, which grow to about 100 meters tall, down to the smallest plant found in the world to date, the globular duckweed Wolffia globosa, which grows to approx. 0.5 millimeters in size, is not only decreasing in size, but has already been partially destroyed. Now, with regard to sociopaths, it is a fact that they bring at least sorrow, but also discord and unhappiness to their own families and also to fellow human beings in general, if they are able to act in their wise way. Very often, there are quite nasty sociopaths in the ranks of those in power, and also in the authorities, who are constantly bringing about new ordinances, regulations and laws, etc., and thus restricting the freedom and rights of citizens more and more, allowing them to be controlled more and more by the security services, secretly observing, spying on, and harassing citizens if they do not suit the authorities concerned for whatever reason. It would be very important to recognize these sociopaths before they are elected, appointed, or otherwise smuggled in and placed in positions in government, or the authorities, etc. Unfortunately, however, the people are incapable of doing this, so they elect persons to government and public authorities, etc., who are unfit for office and self-serving. This is because the citizens are uneducated and blind in their judgment of those who are to be elected to the leadership and administrative positions of the nations. Therefore, it is also possible that the quite dangerous antisocial behavior of sociopaths in governments, state administrations and in the authorities, etc., is gaining the upper hand, whereby the sociopathically active can plunge their peoples into misfortune, such as through wars and other terror. This also makes it possible for more and more new laws, regulations, punishments, and insane decrees, etc., to be imposed on the people, as well as curtailing their freedom and robbing them of their rights as human beings and citizens. It would therefore be urgently necessary for the people, before they elect and appoint any elements in the form of sociopaths and psychopaths to governments, authorities and administrations, etc., to first learn to understand human nature and thus prevent such elements, such as sociopaths and psychopaths, from coming to the helm of governments, authorities, supervisory organizations, associations, security bodies, law enforcement agencies, administrations, or societies, or from acting as supervisory bodies, etc.
Simyase Silver Star Center, the 20th of January, 2024, 1850 hours, Billy.
Are you done reading? You are making such a serious face.
Yes. Also, what you have written here is profound, and it says exactly what needs to be said and explained. However, sociopaths will definitely not agree with this because they will not recognize themselves for what they really are. However, your words will create a certain enlightenment and understanding in those who have to deal with sociopaths in their immediate or wider environment.
That will probably be the case. But here, look, I received this article from Akim that you should read.
Good.
The truth is that everything works out for the best for me, because I live in the success of the idea of the creation. Thoughts on the third of the 12 consciousness-forming sentences from Meditation from a Clear Perspective.
Like all 12 sentences, this sentence is also a means of self-forming human consciousness through concentration, affirmation, meditation, and effective knowledge, and thus a powerful way of using thoughts to trigger valuable feelings, which in turn shape, reshape, and reformat the psyche and consciousness in a creational creative sense. The question here is what is meant by the success of the idea of creation, and why everything turns out to be good for human beings when they become effectively aware of it. The idea of the creation originally leads back to the impulse given by the absolute absolutum for independent self-creation, from which our material universe of creation emerged 46 trillion years ago through a Big Bang. The absolute absolute in turn is the lowest of 7 absolute forms, of which the highest form is the absolute being, which continues to expand and evolve endlessly in the absolute nothing. Everything that exists in our creation universal consciousness, with its 7 universes, was therefore created by the subtle elemental force of creation energy, which originally owes its existence to the seen absolutum. Creation does not think and also has no ideas in the human consciousness sense, because its work is based on creational energetic impulses, which generally function perfectly and on which all creational laws in all its universes and their dimensions are based. But for a better understanding, these creational impulsations and swinging waves are simply called ideas. They also contain the irrevocable laws of causality on which everything in the gross, subtle and subtle material realms is based, including the human being as a unity of his body, his consciousness, and the spark of creation energy that animates him. Without the all-pervading impulses, swinging waves and forces of creation universal consciousness, which travel through all the spaces and times of their universes at 107,000 times the speed of light, nothing could exist, nothing would ever have come into being, and nothing could evolve. Our creation itself is also constantly evolving, because it is only the lowest of 1049 forms of creation, and therefore only relatively perfect. It is the only form of creation that still has a material belt with galaxies, gases, nebulae, suns, planets, etc., and, like many other creations of its level, has to work its way up in seemingly endless eons to the absolute absolutum form of creation and ultimately to the absolute being. Compared to human beings, however, it is unattainably much more highly evolved and has perfectly ordered, regulated, and organized everything in its cosmos on the basis of its creational laws. The human being contains within him a tiny but incredibly powerful, living and indestructible part of the elemental creational power of creation energy. When human beings understand this and realize this truth by consciously repeating the third of the 12 consciousness-forming meditation sentences, they begin to think, feel, sense, and live more and more successfully in accordance with the idea of creation and its laws and recommendations, that is to say, recommendations, which makes many things possible that previously seemed impossible to them. The human being repeats the consciousness-forming meditation sentences consciously and again in the relaxed knowledge that they unfold their effect and causally release forces in him that achieve their effect with absolute certainty in accordance with the creational laws. Then success is assured, and everything gradually turns out to be good for him. As with everything and always in life, this goal also requires constant training and constant endeavor, as a result of which success is absolutely certain. Ultimately, success in more and more things in everyday life becomes easier, and eventually becomes a matter of course, as the repeated, conscious practice of the meditation sentences results in the following learning process, that is to say, learning success: perception, cognition, knowledge, realization, certainty, knowledge, experience, wisdom. The 12 sentences to read: further explanation of the terms perception, recognition, knowledge, realization, certainty, jot knowledge, experience, wisdom, brochure. Why is it so important for us to learn a lot, especially in this current life? By Marianne Jöllinger, Achim Wolf, Germany.
What Achim writes here are good words, and these should inspire readers to think more deeply for themselves.
That really could only be promising. But what do you think about this one, which was sent to me, although I do not know by whom? But I still want to read it to you, even though it is almost 3 years since it was written.
That is how accidental coincidences happen. Posted on the 10th of March, 2021 on Facebook by Anonymous Austria. The masks are starting to come off.
The Chinese biology lab in Wuhan is owned by GlaxoSmithKline, which accidentally owns Pfizer, the one making the Whack.Dot remove against the virus that was accidentally started at the Wuhan Biological Lab, and that was accidentally funded by Dr. Fauci, who accidentally promotes the Whack.Dot. Remove GlaxoSmithKline is accidentally managed by the financial division of BlackRock, which accidentally manages the finances of the open foundation company Soros Foundation, which accidentally runs the French AXA coincidentally. Soros owns the German company Winterthur, which coincidentally set up a Chinese laboratory in Wuhan and was bought out by the German Allianz, which coincidentally has Vanguard as a shareholder, which coincidentally is a shareholder of BlackRock, which coincidentally controls central banks and manages around a third of global investment capital. BlackRock is coincidentally also a major shareholder of Microsoft, owned by Bill Gates, who coincidentally is a Pfizer shareholder. He sells a miracle Whack.Dot remove, and coincidentally is now the first sponsor of WHO Now. You understand how a dead bat sold in a wet market in China infected the entire planet.
Somewhat many coincidences, though such also seem to arise unexpectedly at Arise, which you might want to discuss with. Quetzal has informed me that he...
Regarding the coincidences, I also think this is a bit strange, but what to make of it I do not know, which is why I will not comment. Apparently, this was also published on Facebook. At least, that is what it says at the beginning. Simply believing is not appropriate anyway, because believing is always wrong and only allows for illusory thinking. However, what you say about what Quetzal said at Tahrir, that is something I do not want to get involved in, which I also said because it is a private matter. If someone just wants to believe that unchecked, then that is their business. And faith, as we know, makes the convolutions of the brain atrophy, whether it is religious or secular. It is that is my secret phone ringing. Wait, because it is from out of town, it is someone who knows this number. But there are only a few of them. Nobody knows them except me. Figu, Meyer. Yes, that is me. I am Mrs. I see. Well, Mrs. What I do is just judge something as good or not good and also just state the facts. So I am not biased in any way and do not take sides. So I can only say that the actions of the governments of Germany and the 50 or so countries that are supplying Zelensky with weapons, ammunition and money are wrong, just as it is also wrong that Netanyahu is being cheered to the skies by Germany and others in Israel. It can
Omitted.
Of course, and whether you are a Christian, as you say, that does not matter to me, because what a human being believes or not, that does not matter to me at all, and is never a reason for me to see in him anything other than what he is, just a human being. But the fact that around 50 countries are supplying Zelensky with weapons, ammunition and money so that he can continue to wage war on behalf of America, which is nothing other than a strange and unprecedented world war, is more than just a farce. It should also be said that certainly not all those in power in Germany are Nazis, but only a slimy part of those in power who pretend to be friendly to Jews and behave like this on the outside, but are in fact hostile to Jews and would prefer to kill off and massacre all believers in Jews. However, I must also correct you that these lousy elements are not actual Nazis, but neo-Nazis, successors and imitators of the former Nazis, that is to say human beings, with a mindset similar to that of the actual Nazis during the last World War, who lived out their anti-Semitism. Today, the anti-Jewish part of the government in Germany, that is to say neo-Nazis, might hypocritically appear to the public and play at being friendly to Jews in government and be praised for it, while in reality, however, anti-Semitism is advocated and endorsed within themselves to such an extent that this type and form of neo-Nazi is seething with anger and sheer rage and almost bursting with hatred of Jews. Some of these sneaky misleaders are also howling along in order to make a mockery of other governing parties and try to exclude them from the government, which is currently happening, probably because the enemies do not fit in with the usual mendacious stuff and are endeavoring to ensure that the Federal Republic of Germany, which is under the patronage of the USA and only exists on paper, should withdraw from membership of the EU dictatorship. The fact that these government elements, who are hostile to other parties, are still stirring up the German people and viciously calling those who do not go along with them right-wing extremists, and that they are equally dragging the people along in this wise and then dragging them along in their hundreds of thousands through idiotic demonstrations, without realizing what the rulers are actually trying to achieve in this respect, namely to discredit and ostracize those who do not fit in with their broken sham thinking. This clearly shows how lowly intelligent and therefore non-thinking that part of the population is, which is blind to the government and goes along with everything that is deceitfully brought in by the fallible rulers. The fact that these neo-Nazis in government are dividing the people of Germany is as obvious as the fact that many human beings in this country are becoming more and more sick in the head and often wipe out entire families by murdering and killing fellow human beings. The ineptitude of those in power does nothing about it in the wise that correct action would be taken, and the people would be taught, led and guided regarding a correct way of life, as this is also equally not done in America, but everything is only focused on money and might of those in power.
Omitted.
What you say is absolutely correct. Anti-Semitism is once again taking hold worldwide, especially in Germany. But this has nothing to do with the fact that world domination is to be sought in the name of the Jews, because the believers in the Jews are happy, grateful, and glad when they are left alone. As far as world domination is concerned, this does not refer to a political world domination, but to the fact that this only refers to the Jewish faith, that is to say the Jewish religion, to Jewish theism. I'd already discussed this topic with my first player in contact, Simya Se, unfortunately only very superficially, which they did address, but they did not actually explain in more detail what the whole thing was actually about. As a result, it was not made clear that the actual fact of the desire for world domination was actually the one that I want to explain to you now. As I have already mentioned, the world domination we, Simya Se and I, are talking about does not refer to political ambitions, but solely to the fact that the Jewish religion should spread worldwide and become dominant worldwide. This was to be achieved through a religious war of faith, whereby the war of faith was to be fought with weapons of faith, that is to say, with words of faith, which were to demand blood in such a way that this would resound in faith. This form of war of faith originated with a devout Jew, namely a Zionist, who in the 1880s founded an anti-socialist group of radical Zionists, which gave rise to so-called revisionist Zionism. Unfortunately, I cannot remember what the man's name was, because my memory is also not the youngest, and unfortunately, as a result of my stroke, no longer fully functional. Well, that is one thing. But another is that the Zionists call themselves that because they refer to the name Zion, and thus to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is considered the residence of YHWH, that is to say the God of the Jews, by the believers in the Jews. The world domination of the Jewish faith was to be secretly spread in the name Zion, that is to say with the designation Zionists, against which, however, it was not openly but secretly fought in faith that Eretz Israel should be considered the home of the Jews alone and belong to them alone. This is because the religious Zionists believed and defended, and also still do today, that Israel was granted to the Jews alone by their YHWH, and that it always belongs to them. YHWH, this designation of God, was originally brought by Abram from Africa, that is to say from Ethiopia, when he founded the Hebrano community about 4.5 millennia ago. Judaism also goes back to him, but this does not want to be true because the believers only believe in one God and do not want to know the truth. The invented story of YHWH is more important than the actual truth. As with the stories about Emmanuel, Mohammed and Buddha, etc., because the Zionists only believe in the motto of religious Zionism. Although there was a larger grouping of this form of Zionism in the century before last, and also at the beginning of the last century, the whole of this madness was then dissolved, namely revisionist Zionism, and formed into a new Zionism in the 1920s. Although freedom of belief was preserved, and this was never advocated with war, murder, and manslaughter, and therefore never had anything to do with such machinations.
Omitted.
Of course I can tell them that. Eretz Israel means something like State of Israel or Land of Israel.
Omitted.
That is clear. The Israeli people had absolutely nothing to do with it. They cultivated faith in their YHWH then as now and since time immemorial. And indeed, since Abram came from Africa and founded the Hebrew group thousands of years ago, from which the Hebrew people then also emerged. However, this is not known in Hebrew history, and is even disputed because there are no written or other records of this origin, which I was also only able to experience and learn about through Sfath. Regarding the true and real origin of the asocial grouping of the lunatic Zionist movement of the revolutionary Zionists now, everything is actually public knowledge. However, The fact that a group of these early Zionists secretly wanted to realize the crazy idea of achieving religious Zionist world domination was deliberately kept secret from the majority of Zionist believers, as well as from all Jewish believers. As a result, not a single letter about it was also written down, and everything remained secret. While the crazy idea of world domination of Zionism was secretly worked on, which ultimately had serious consequences long after all the members of this Zionist group had already died. Despite the craziness of the idea of this asocial and practically dangerous original Zionist grouping, paradoxically, the aim was also to relocate all believers in the Jewish religion scattered around the world to Eretz Israel. Much is also known about this elsewhere, but not a single letter has been written about the completely crazy idea of the world domination plans of the crazy Zionist group, of which not even the normal Zionists knew anything. Everything of the asocial Zionists was conducted in such a wise and secret manner that really only the innermost circle of the early Zionists were able to secretly strive for this world domination without the wider circle knowing about it. The goal of world domination of the Zionist movement was therefore an aspect that was purely religiously orientated, namely that all Jews in the world should settle in the Middle East, whereby the intended area was up to the border of today's Iraq. However, this form of world domination had nothing to do with the protocols of the elders of Zion, about which I will have more to say. Zionism is actually nothing more than a sect, just as all religions have many sects, which spread and became noticeable in America and throughout Europe through its secret striving for world domination, not openly proclaimed, but secretly striven for. As a reaction to this, a general hatred of the Jews quickly grew, giving rise to the anti-Semitism that is being rekindled and strengthened today by America, Zelensky, and Netanyahu. The secret work of the original Zionists at that time, from which the normal believers in the Jews were absolutely excluded and therefore not involved, led to growing anti-Semitism, which had already existed for thousands of years as simple hatred of the Jews, which also became increasingly stronger, mainly in Germany, but also elsewhere in the world. National Socialism then emerged in Germany, which ultimately gave rise to the Third World War, the first, from 1756 to 1763, is deliberately omitted because America triggered it, through which millions upon millions of Jews were murdered and a virtual Holocaust took place. However, the traditional hatred of Jews contributed to this in a wise way, which has been idiotically fueled since time immemorial, especially also by the myth of the Jewish world conspiracy, which still exists today. In its actual origin, the invented forgeries of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion are the reason for all world conspiracies against the Jews. For Hitler, who paradoxically was himself of Jewish descent, these conspiracy theories were the reason for his insane hatred of the Jews. This was even more the reason why anti-Semitism flared up again in the Arab world, when Hitler ignited the World War and spread the persecution and extermination of the Jews. According to the world-spread lies of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion, powerful Jews from all over the world are supposed to meet in a secret place and decide on world domination and also on how to subjugate earthly humanity and control the entire financial world, all media and the entire cultures of the peoples, thus practically establishing a dictatorship over all humanity. This is, of course, an anti-Semitic lie and unparalleled nonsense, because no such or similar meeting has ever taken place in the past, nor will one ever take place, and neither will Jewish world domination. As far as such an idea is concerned, this was a brief attempt by a small anti-social Zionist movement at a fanatical religious world domination that was attempted but also failed miserably. The whole undignified and sleazy, anti-Semitic pamphlet of lies is nothing other than a conspiracy directed against the believers in the Jews, which was already organized in 1862 by a Jew-hating 11-member American group of drama artists and legal scholars, an effective Jew-hating group who wrote a rude world enlightenment pamphlet called Coming Jewish World Order. However, this pamphlet was then shelved and therefore not discussed further after the then American President Abraham Lincoln was confronted with it by one of the legal scholars, a friend of Lincoln's, with the request that the pack of Jews should be expelled from America. However, as a believer in God, Lincoln did not agree to this and threatened to have the showmen and legal scholars wiped out if they spread their pamphlet, which his friend was anxious to have shelved. But that was not the end of it, because some of the showmen and legal scholars of the Jew haters were bent on revenge. So it was decided to get rid of President Lincoln, which was also put into practice 3 years later, and he was shot. The hatefully cobbled together Coming Jewish World Order was not taken up again until the 1880s. But it was not until the 1890s that it was reworked by other Jew haters, and the pamphlet was given the title, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. That is actually what I have to say to your questions, except perhaps that I have a good relationship with various Jewish believers, including an elderly woman and her 3 siblings whose parents were murdered by the Nazis during the last World War.
Omitted.
That may be your view, but what is real I do not know. For my part, I do not know the German foreign minister, because I only see her on the news on television, and she does not exactly make a good impression on me. Also, to the extent that she has sociopathic traits, is not exactly the brightest, and as foreign minister she obviously just likes to fly around to foreign countries and does not do what she should. Unfortunately, this is often the case with ineffectual rulers who only have a big mouth but no brains. And it seems to me, watching this woman on television, that she has no life experience whatsoever, and is only traveling around the world to be able to plagiarize where she has been in the world and which greats of the various governments of foreign countries she has been able to shake hands with.
Omitted.
Plagiarize. Well, here in this part of Switzerland they equate that with lowly intelligent loudmouthing and with cutting up, that is to say pomposity.
Omitted.
That does not just happen in Germany, but also in every other country where the same thing is done under certain circumstances. Regarding the other point you raise, I can only say that I see Zelensky as a stubborn war fanatic and warmonger, but also Netanyahu, whom the Plejaren describe as a dictator with the same Nazi mindset, and also acting in the same way, who is well on the way to carrying out genocide against the Palestinians. And as I said, I see Zelensky as a warmonger and warmonger without equal, acting on behalf of and clearly supported by hegemonic America. And I see Putin as an intransigent and blindly angry war leader, full of vindictiveness, from which he cannot free himself, but in this respect is absolutely a prisoner of his own self and also walks over dead bodies. Like the 2 others, as does every other war leader and every human being who commits murder. That is to say also every soldier, every mercenary, secret service agent and security official, etc.
Omitted.
No, that is not my opinion, because I do not have one. Consequently, I can only express what I see and ascertain in the how and what, etc., in the apparent thinking, disposition, and actions of these human beings. Consequently, I can only judge these factors, no more. And this has nothing and in no wise anything to do with the human being himself. Because from this point of view, a completely different judgment has to be made, which in no way has anything to do with what the human being's behavior, attitude, actions, and conduct is. The human being, whatever he might do, and whatever his disposition and actions are evil and wrong, is and remains a human being who is also to be seen, treated, and never condemned in this way. Therefore, if he has committed them, he should be punished for evil and wrong deeds, and also for torture, abuse, and even murder, but never by the death penalty, as you misses. Such things are not provided for by life itself and are wrong and only devised by human beings, but never commanded or counseled by an imaginary God. But now, Mrs. Think about what I have said and draw your own conclusions. That is all I can really tell you. Adieu, Mrs. Excuse me, Ptah, the caller was a bit long-winded. As you heard, she lives in Germany and is worried.
That is what I overheard. But you always amaze me with the way you explain everything, which I think you should also recall and write down the conversation, and especially the answers you gave this woman. Because you explain a lot of things that would otherwise never come up because the truth is hushed up.
These kinds of questions are often asked, usually by email, which I then unfortunately have to laboriously answer myself, because these questions are addressed to me and nobody is supposed to know anything about them. But other emails are answered by Michael, and with him everything goes Schlegel a Vega, and without him being interfered with, as happens with me and makes my work hellishly difficult. But if I also have to call up all this and write it down, then I end up with a contact report that is a mile long. The woman's questions in particular are,
They are not so important that they need to be recalled and reproduced, but your answers should be of great interest and enlightening, and it is also clear what the woman's questions were about. And with regard to what the disturbances of the religious energies do to your work on the computer, it would be appropriate for Michael to describe some of the incidents he has experienced with you in your work, which would certainly interest the readers of the conversation reports if you then add his explanations to one of our conversations.
I do not think that is very important, but I can ask him.
Together with my father Svath, you were able to visit a man in the past, in America. His name was Eric Weiss, but I would be interested to know, because I am completely ignorant of such things, how my father wrote in his annals what this man...
That is, as I think Svath described it. But I think he also wrote that I had to promise Eric that I would never speak openly about it, and never put to use anything of what he explained to me, did he not?
That is so, yes.
Precisely. I never did either. And what is more, I remain persistently silent and will also continue to do so. This also towards you, dear friend, because my promise included that I would never explain any of this to friends and my own family members.
Then I will not push you, now or later. Excuse me, because I know that a promise made is as precious to you as your own life.
Yes, you can define it like that. But tell me, no, excuse me, I still have these pages here that Christian emailed me. It is best to skim these and then submit the questions to the panel. But I should have a quick report on what the committee says, because we want to discuss the whole thing at the meeting. Here, this is the page you can take a picture of.
Is already done.
Good. Every morning, today it was 2.15a. I deal with various things, and I am particularly interested in forgeries, which have been done since time immemorial, such as with the Bible, which is a lie, but also with the Brothers Grimm, for example, to whom fairy tales are attributed that they never wrote, but parroted and also falsified. I am also interested in the falsification of antiquities, such as the fact that much art from Egypt has been falsified since ancient times, because the Roman emperors brought statues from Egypt to Italy and had them copied or completed by Roman sculptors. Also the lies and forgeries about who discovered and colonized America, etc., how in the new era in developing countries, medicines are forged and distributed all over the world, like the many fraudulent biographical lies, for example by Karl May that he had mastered 40 languages and had to be happy that he could speak 2 languages to some extent. Or also the lie of the Nazi ancestry, but also the many forgeries of books, such as the Hitler diaries. But there are also the forgeries of old monkey bones of Charles Darwin, as well as forgeries of other antiquity researchers. That countless printing plates of Dali works were forged and are still on the market today. Salvador Dali even knew that forgeries of his works were being produced and marketed. The works of Albrecht Dürer were also forged on a massive scale, especially his prints. In total, there are over 500,000 of them. Books, works of art, pictures and paintings, as well as sculptures and statues, etc., are now in museums and private ownership, and are also very expensive, often costing millions, and many of them are just forgeries. Well, our contact reports were also falsified early on. Especially Ilse von Jacobi and the Vates were big in this, as were Hans-Ruedi Glanzmann and Dr. Linus Sherwin, who even claimed that he was married to Sim Yase. Others also still feel authorized today to falsify the reports in their favor, or simply to steal and rewrite passages. Since then, we have counteracted this by printing the contact reports as originals ourselves, as well as all books and writings, etc., as you know. Since then, we have been producing the contact reports in large blocks of around 500 pages, of which I think we have 20 so far, with the 21st already in correction work.
That regarding the forgeries, my father also listed that in his annals, as well as that you two have come into contact with certain persons and incidents in the past, from your own experience and witnessing, through which you have seen and experienced the real truth which is being misrepresented today.
Unfortunately, that is the case. Consequently, today works of art, books, objects, and antiquities, etc., are traded as genuine or kept in museums or hoarded in private ownership, which corresponds to nothing but forgeries. But it is not said for nothing. The world wants to be cheated. But keeping quiet about it is better than being called a liar and a cheat because of it, because the truth does not want to be heard, let alone accepted.
I am aware of that.
Of course, how could it also be otherwise? But tell me, do you also have cats on Era? I did not see any when I was there.
You also could not, because this mammal is not known to us.
So be it. But we have them here in large numbers. They actually come from Egypt, where they lived as wild animals thousands of years ago, but were then caught and bred and turned into pets and used as mousers, namely in the granaries, because countless mice were raging there.
My father wrote quite a bit about this in his annals, that you too looked into the matter of the origin of cats and actually found the origin in Egypt. That got me interested myself, which is why I am also interested in the modern-day lifestyles and diseases of these animals.
Aha, that is good. Are you aware of cat AIDS? I was thinking and reading something about that, and it was written that human beings cannot be infected by this feline immunodeficiency virus, or just this cat AIDS.
That is what I am also aware of.
Then my question has already resulted in an answer, although I did think of something else I want to mention, namely that white emmer used to be sown and harvested by one of our neighboring farmers. That is to say, is an ancient grain, a grain that was an absolute rarity even back then, that it was still grown, sown, and also harvested. The farmer did not tell us where he got the seed from. That was back in my adolescence. I can still remember it well. Farmer Kern in Niederflax sowed and also harvested this grain in a field. And I also helped and made dolls, which were then thrown into a large threshing machine in the barn by the Stundler Mag, or Stundlipfaf, to thresh out the grain. Mag, as he was known, was a member of a sect and stole tools and anything that was not nailed down from the neighbors, especially on Sundays when he would sneak home from the sect sermon. What I think now is that the old grain varieties should be sown and harvested again, because the last pinch on the scourge is that what can still be saved can still be saved. All farmers should finally get away from the cursed chemical fertilizers, which only leach out and destroy the soil, in order to plant cereals, potatoes, and vegetables of all kinds, etc., according to their location, and produce everything without the destructive application of poisons. The replanting and harvesting of old grain varieties, which were selected from wild grasses and became one of the most important foodstuffs for human beings, is very important. The cereals developed from grasses became robust, and would also be robust again in the future, especially the ancient cereals, if they were sown again, like many other tried and tested crops that were planted in the past, but have unfortunately been replaced by inferior new varieties, and are no longer as resistant to nature as the earlier genera and species, which were still vigorous, strong, stable, and healthy for human beings. However, in order to allow all that which is valuable to thrive and grow again, it is necessary that the chemical poisons that are spread in fields, forests, meadows, and pastures, that is to say chemical fertilizers and manure poisoned with chemicals, etc., disappear. Biodiversity-promoting genera and species of plants are now needed to promote biodiversity again, but in a biologically good way, and thus absolutely without chemicals. Only in this way can all life be returned to the workings of free nature, which is also only possible if the massive overpopulation is reduced and disappears as quickly as possible, which can only be achieved by a controlled global stop to births. Only this is really the solution, because all other attempts to minimize overpopulation are wrong, ill-considered, and pointless, just hatched and hypocritically conceived by underdeveloped brains. The fields, meadows, floodplains, and forests, as well as the moors and rivers, streams, rivers, lakes, and puddling waters, and also the seas must be restored. All usable and fertile soils, fields, meadows, and floodplains are to be optimized from an agroecological point of view. Forests are to be ecologically restored, maintained, and managed, not cut down for the sake of profit and clear-cutting. This is especially not the case as every tree and every shrub, like every plant large or small, is vital to life, absorbing these toxins, such as CO2, from the negligently poisoned atmosphere, but also producing vital oxygen, which is completely disregarded. The irresponsible cutting down of trees and the destruction of plants of all genera and species in general is already having the evil effect of killing human beings, as well as animals, creatures, other self-propelled life forms on and also in the earth, and even the largest and smallest plants, because they can no longer breathe correctly or at all as a result of the poisoned atmosphere. Many human beings are already suffering from respiratory problems as a result of this evil, which weakens their immunity and makes them no longer resistant to diseases and the environment. There is an urgent need to get away from chemicals and create biodiversity, and everything must be returned to real nature. And nothing should be treated with chemicals anymore, because pesticides, etc., not only destroy, but also eradicate everything. If we consider that around 60,000 genera and species of animals, creatures and other self-propelled life forms are wiped out every year, as well as terrestrial life forms and plants of all genera and species, from the smallest to the largest tree, then we should finally realize how precarious the situation is for all life forms on Earth. This also includes the planet itself, because it has become weaker through all the exploitation of it and is beginning to defend itself, just as nature is also doing against the atmosphere poisoned by the earthling, the waters of all kinds, the normal climate destroyed by human beings, and.
What you list is all that Earth's humanity ought to direct its mindfulness to, but it will not do so, as you know.
Unfortunately, that is the bitter truth, because only very few isolated human beings will give it real thought. Very few will come out of their illusory thinking, and those who do will only become wise through suffering harm.
You are also right about that, but I have to go again now, so I will just mention this.